Imagine, if you will, that you are sitting in a completely empty room, and resting on the table right in front of you is a single, stark, white page.
Just a blank page.
Right, just this minimal, stark, white background. There is no introductory text. There is no title. There are no explanatory paragraphs to hold your hand. There is just two massive numbers staring back at you in bold black ink.
It is an incredibly striking visual when you strip away all the academic formatting.
Exactly. On the left side of the page, the number is 0.99. And on the right side of the page, the number is 0.955.
Just those two figures, hovering there, demanding to be understood.
Yeah. And when you first look at those numbers as a layperson, they seem, well, virtually identical, right?
Yeah, they look very close.
They are mere fractions of a point apart. But in the highly precise world of global data and human development, the chasm between 0.955 and 0.99 is like the size of the Grand Canyon. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
What we are looking at is the Gender Development Index, or
Yep.
the GDI, that 0.955 on the right. That represents the global average for gender development.
Right.
It represents the entire world's collective struggle, progress, and frankly, frustrating reality when it comes to the equality between men and women.
And that near-perfect 0.99 sitting on the left, that belongs to Ecuador.
Ecuador, that single stunning data point is the absolute crux of our exploration today.
It really is the anchor of the whole report.
Because I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. When you think of a highly developed, almost perfectly gender-equal society, what immediately pops into your head?
Most people picture the Nordic countries.
Right. You probably picture places like Norway or Sweden with their massive sovereign wealth funds, their booming tech sectors, and their incredibly high gross domestic product.
Yeah, countries that have essentially bought their way into perfect social infrastructure.
Exactly. That is the traditional mental model we all hold.
And frankly, it is the model that most development economics relies upon. We assume that immense economic wealth is, the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for high-level social equality.
We think the money has to come first.
Right. We think the equality is a luxury purchased with that wealth later down the line.
But then we get our hands on this comprehensive multi-indicator data analysis.
Yes, the 1990 to 2023 Human Development Report.
Specifically comparing Ecuador to the rest of the globe. And the data just, well, it shatters that mental model entirely.
It really does.
Our mission today is to figure out how this is even mathematically possible. How does a traditional Latin American country, one that is simultaneously battling intense, well-documented economic constraints, reach a point of near-perfect equality in this specific metric?
And outpace the global average so drastically.
Yeah, so drastically.
This raises an important question. What exactly are the hidden development pains behind this brilliant statistical performance?
Ooh, right, because a 2A.99 on the Gender Development Index does not exist in a vacuum.
No, it's not magic. To understand what we can call the Ecuador paradox, we have to look at the entire machinery of their society.
The whole picture.
Today, we are taking a massive stack of data. Over 3 decades of rigorously tracked metrics covering life expectancy, education, income, carbon footprints, and political representation.
It's a massive amount of data.
It is, and we are going to tear it apart to find the truth. We want to show you how human development isn't always about who has the biggest wallet.
Oh, I love that.
Sometimes it is entirely about the mechanisms a society builds to spend the currency it actually has.
And to start making sense of those mechanisms, we need to begin with the overarching macro-level view. We need to talk about the Human Development Index, or the HDI.
The big unified score.
Right. For those of you listening who might not, spend your weekends reading UN Day reports, the HDI is essentially the big report card that judges a country's overall progress.
It combines health, education, and standard of living.
Exactly. And looking at the data from 1990 all the way up to 2023, Ecuador's long-term climb is honestly remarkable.
Let's look at the baseline.
Back in 1990, their HDI was sitting at 0.646. And over the next 33 years, they managed this steady, almost relentless upward climb.
Reaching 0.777 by the year 2023.
0.777.
Which is a crucial figure to contextualize because the global average in 2023 was only 0.756.
Okay.
So Ecuador isn't just improving in isolation, they are consistently keeping their head above the global waterline.
They are systematically beating the global average in overall human development.
Yes, they are.
But I'm going to stop you right there, because this is where the paradox really hits you in the face.
Oh, the economic reality check.
Exactly. We measure that economic engine using the gross national income, or GNI, per capita. To make this tangible for you listening, I want you to imagine two wallets sitting on a table side by side.
Good analogy.
The first wallet represents the global average income. If you open it up, you will find exactly $20,327 inside.
And we should clarify, that figure's from 2023, but it is adjusted for 2021 purchasing power parity, or PPP dollars.
Okay, wait, let's break that down for a second. Purchasing power parity sounds like heavy economic jargon.
It is, but the concept is very straightforward. Think of PPP as a great equalizer for data.
Okay, how so?
Well, a dollar in New York City does not buy you the same amount of food or housing as a dollar in Quito, Ecuador. If we just looked at raw currency exchange rates, the data would be skewed.
Oh, right, because things cost different amounts.
Exactly. Purchasing power parity adjusts the numbers so we are comparing what the money can actually buy on the ground. We are measuring real, lived purchasing power.
Making the comparison completely fair across different global economies.
Precisely.
I love that. Think of it like a global Big Mac index.
Mhm.
We are looking at the actual standard of living that money provides, not just the raw numbers on a bank statement.
Right.
So, back to our two wallets. We have the global wallet, fully adjusted for fair purchasing power, holding $20,327. Now, open the second wallet on the table, which represents Ecuador's average adjusted income.
And what's in there?
Inside, there's only $13,986.
Wow. The math on that is sobering.
It's staggering. The global wallet is roughly 1.45 times bigger than Ecuador's wallet. Their economic capacity, their sheer income-generating power, lags the global average by roughly 31%.
That is a massive gap.
It is. So I have to push back here. I'm struggling to reconcile these two data points.
The HDI versus the GNI.
Yeah. If their economic creativity and their actual income lag the global average by nearly a third, how on earth are they winning the human development race?
That's a great question.
It's like a guy with a significantly smaller salary, somehow living in a much nicer house, eating better food with a better health plan than the millionaire next door. It defies the basic gravity of economics. How does it mathematically work?
It works because human development, as measured by these indices, is fundamentally a composite structure. It is a three-legged stool.
Okay, what are the legs?
It is not just money. The three legs are health, education, and income. Ecuador is compensating for that smaller, almost $14,000 wallet by drastically overperforming in the other two categories.
Oh, I see.
They are taking less money and converting it into human welfare at a highly efficient rate.
That's incredible.
However, we cannot romanticize this. This system has incredibly fragile stress points.
Because of the lack of cash.
Exactly. When you operate with a smaller economic buffer, your social achievements are highly vulnerable to sudden systemic shocks.
And unfortunately, we have the exact data to prove that fragility. We have to talk about the brutal reality of the year 2020.
Yes, the pandemic year. If you trace the long-term line of Ecuador's HDI, it was climbing beautifully, right? A testament to decades of hard work.
It hit 0.765 by 2019.
Right. But in 2020, it suffered a severe plunging drop down to 0.740.
Wow.
That is a 3.3% reduction in overall society-wide human development in a single year.
To put that in perspective for you listening, the global average also dropped in 2020, obviously. The whole world took a hit. But the global drop was only from 0.745 to 0.742.
Barely a blip.
Yeah, it's a rounding error compared to Ecuador's absolute freefall.
Exactly. And this brings us right back to the wallets. The global infrastructure, on average, had the economic padding to absorb the shock.
An extra $6,000 per person?
Yes. They had emergency funds, they could outbid other nations for therapeutics, they could afford to lock down their economies and subsidize their workers.
They could buy their way through the crisis.
Ecuador's system, while highly efficient at converting limited funds into high development during times of peace and stability, lacked those deep economic shock absorbers when a global crisis hit.
It reveals a deep structural vulnerability in the paradox.
It absolutely does.
So if they don't have the global average income to fall back on, what are they rich in? If their wealth isn't purely financial, what is the currency they are hoarding that pushes their overall HDI score so high?
That is the big question.
Well, if we pivot to the next page of the report, the answer is time. Let's look at the literal lifespan of the population.
This is perhaps one of the most profound and moving metrics in the entire data set.
Oh, I agree.
When we look at life expectancy at birth in 2023, the global average is 73.4 years.
Okay.
But a child born in Ecuador in 2023 can expect to live to 77.4 years.
That is exactly 4 extra years of life. 4 years.
What's fascinating here is what 4 extra years of life actually means for the architecture of a society.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, it is very easy for us to just look at 73 versus 77 as numbers on a spreadsheet, right? But think about the real-world implications of giving millions of people an extra half-decade on Earth.
Is math.
4 extra years means more time for multi-generational wealth transfer. It means a deeper, longer preservation of cultural memory within families.
And it changes the entire dynamic of the labor force.
Yes, exactly.
If grandparents are living healthy lives into their late 70s, they are alive longer to assist with childcare. And what happens when a grandparent can watch a toddler?
It frees up the parents.
Yes, particularly mothers, to participate more actively in the labor force. Those extra 4 years aren't just a biological win, they are an invisible economic engine powering the society.
That's a great point.
And the return on investment for educating a citizen pays out dividends for 4 additional years.
Precisely. You are amortizing the cost of public education and infrastructure over a significantly longer productive lifespan.
And when you break those 4 extra years down by gender, the numbers get even more wild.
Let's look at the women.
Globally, women live to an average of 75.9 years. In Ecuador, women live to be 80.1 years old.
They are crossing the 80-year threshold.
Ecuadorian women are outliving their global peers by 4.2 years. And Ecuadorian men, at 74.7 years, are easily beating the global male average of 71.2 years.
They are banking time at an astonishing rate.
They really are.
But again, we have to play devil's advocate and look at the fragility of how that time is secured.
Right. The 2020 crash.
The routine public health infrastructure in Ecuador, things like basic vaccinations, localized maternal care clinics, general preventative medicine, is clearly robust enough to push human lifespans toward the 80-year mark.
They have mastered the everyday healthcare.
But look at what the data shows us during that 2020 crash.
Oh, the 2020 life expectancy drop is terrifying to look at on a graph. It's an absolute cliff face.
It really is.
In 2019, life expectancy in Ecuador was sitting pretty, pushing all the way up to 77.3 years overall, right before the pandemic hit. And then in 2020, it violently plummeted down to 72.0 years.
A loss of 5.3 years of life expectancy in a single stroke.
Just wiped out. Decades of incremental, hard-fought public health progress completely erased in 12 months.
It's devastating.
I mean, think about the societal trauma of that. That isn't just a statistical adjustment. That is a massive swath of localized knowledge, of caregivers, of family anchors just vanishing.
This reinforces our earlier point about the two wallets. The system is incredibly efficient, but highly fragile.
Because the baseline is lower.
Yes. When you have a smaller economic baseline, your emergency infrastructure is inherently compromised. Your intensive care unit capacity, your number of advanced ventilators per capita, your ability to procure emergency therapeutics on the global market at premium prices, all of that requires cold, hard cash.
Yeah, there's no way around that.
The routine system holds up beautifully under normal conditions, but under sudden, acute systemic stress, the health infrastructure fractured under the weight of the pandemic.
Okay, so they have the years. And it's important to note that even with that devastating pandemic drop, their system proved resilient enough to rebound. They bounced back up to 77.4 years by 2023.
Which is a testament to their baseline infrastructure.
So they have the gift of time. But that begs the next logical question. What are they doing with those years?
Well,
If health is one pillar compensating for the lower income, education has to be the other. Let's talk about the mind and the foundation of knowledge.
the education data presents us with a fascinating and somewhat heartbreaking gap between intent and reality.
Oh, how so?
We evaluate a country's educational landscape using two specific indicators: expected years of schooling and mean years of schooling.
Okay.
Expected years is essentially a measure of systemic ambition. It represents the number of years a child entering the school system today can expect to receive based on current enrollment rates and government provisioning.
And Ecuador's ambition is sky high. In 2023, Ecuador sits at 14.9 expected years of school.
Almost 15 years.
They are absolutely dominating the global average, which is stuck down at 13-point-year years. Almost 15 years of expected education means the systemic investment is undeniably there.
The physical schools are built.
The seats in the classrooms are available, the teachers are hired, The expectation of a nearly college-level education is fundamentally built into the societal blueprint.
But then we flip the coin and look at the mean years of schooling. This is the actual realized average number of years of education received by people ages 25 and older.
This is what is actually happening on the ground.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
The actual average years of schooling achieved in Ecuador is only 9 years.
Which is just barely hovering above the global average of 8.8 years.
I want you listening to think about this like a gym membership.
Good analogy.
Ecuador, as a nation, has paid for the premium, top-tier, 15-year masterclass gym membership. The ambition is there. The systemic investment is there. They have bought access to the equipment. That's the expected years.
But the actual gym attendance.
Exactly. The actual gym attendance, the mean years of schooling, hasn't quite caught up yet.
Yeah.
The population is only going to the gym for 9 years instead of the 15 they have access to. Why the massive disconnect? Why are kids stopping at year 9?
It is fundamentally a conversion efficiency problem. Pumping state resources into the availability of education is step one. Building the school is the easy part. But ensuring students don't drop out is a much more complex socioeconomic hurdle. And to understand the mechanism behind this dropout rate, we have to connect this right back to the income data we started with.
Remember that small wallet?
Right, the $13,986 GNI.
Yeah.
When a family is operating under intense economic constraint, the pressure for teenagers to leave the education system and enter the informal labor market to support the household is immense.
That makes total sense.
The seat in the classroom is waiting for them. The state has provided it. The ambition is there. But the immediate economic reality of needing to put food on the table pulls them away.
So it's not a lack of caring about education.
Not at all. Converting expected years into mean years isn't just an educational policy challenge. It is entirely a poverty alleviation challenge. Economic gravity is pulling them out of the classroom.
Wow. So if we synthesize what we've learned so far, we have a country with a smaller wallet, exceptional but fragile longevity, and massive educational ambition that is constantly fighting against the gravity of poverty.
That's a fair summary.
If education and health are shifting this dynamically, how does this disrupt the traditional power dynamics of the society? If women are living to 80 and the educational gap is fighting to close, what happens to the balance of power?
This brings us to the absolute centerpiece of today's exploration.
The gender revolution.
And revolution really is the only appropriate word here when you look at the longitudinal data. Let's return to the hook we started with.
That staggering 0.99 on the Gender Development Index.
Right, it's just a beautiful number.
It means Ecuador is placed firmly in Global Group 1 for gender parity. And when you crack open that 0.99 and look at the engine inside, the internal balance is practically flawless.
The HDI for females in Ecuador in 2023 is 0.776.
And the HDI for males is 0.777.
They are separated by 1/1000th of a point.
In terms of health, knowledge, and living standards, the playing field between men and women has been effectively leveled.
But the GDI is just a static snapshot of the current state of development. To understand the sheer velocity of Ecuador's progress, we have to look at the Gender Inequality Index, or the GII.
Right. Now, to be clear on the methodology, unlike the GDI where higher is better, the GII measures the loss in achievements due to gender inequality.
Yeah.
So a lower score is better. You want this number to be as close to 0 as possible.
Right, lower is better. Back in 1990, Ecuador's GII was sitting at a highly problematic 0.648.
There was massive, entrenched, systemic inequality.
But by 2023, that number had plummeted down to 0.358. They rank 92nd globally, which vastly beats the global average GII of 0.455.
That is a 45% reduction in gender inequality over the span of 33 years.
How do you dismantle almost half of a society's gender inequality in just 3 decades? That doesn't happen by accident.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the data reveals 2 massive structural engines driving this improvement.
Okay, what's engine number 1?
The first engine is reproductive health. We track this primarily through the maternal mortality ratio, or MMR. This is the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. This is where you really need to visualize the data because the contrast is shocking. Think of maternal mortality like a foundational block in a Jenga tower.
Exactly.
If a mother dies in childbirth, the family's economic upward mobility collapses. Older siblings are pulled out of school to take care of the newborn.
Which directly connects to that 9.0 mean years of schooling we just talked about.
Yes. The loss of a mother is an economic and social earthquake for a family. Now, globally, that earthquake is happening constantly. The global average for maternal mortality is a massive, alarming 216.1 deaths per 100,000 births.
Now look at Ecuador.
Their MMR is just 65.7.
That lower maternal mortality rate is the bedrock of their gender parity. When women are not dying or suffering severe, debilitating morbidity in childbirth at high rates, it fundamentally alters their lifelong trajectory.
They remain in the workforce.
They continue their education, they accumulate capital. Furthermore, we see an interesting nuance in the education data that supports this. The percentage of women in Ecuador with at least some secondary education is 54.2%. Now, technically, that is lower than the global female average of 62.0%.
Wait, I'm confused. If their absolute female education rate is lower than the global average, how does that help their overall gender equality score? That seems contradictory.
Because the GII measures inequality within the specific country's own borders. While the absolute number is lower than the global average, the gap between men and women locally in Ecuador is much, much tighter.
Oh, I see.
The educational resources that do exist, remember the smaller wallet, are being distributed far more equitably between boys and girls than they are in many other parts of the world.
Okay, so fewer women dying in childbirth keeps them in the workforce and stabilizes families, and educational resources are split evenly. That is engine one.
Right.
But economic survival and going to high school doesn't equal systemic power. Who is actually changing the laws to protect these women? Who has allocated the budget for the maternal clinics that keep that MMR down at 65?
Which brings us perfectly to engine two, political empowerment.
This is the data point that absolutely blew my mind. We're looking at the share of seats in parliament held by women.
Let's go back to our baseline of 1990 again.
In 1990, women held just 3.7% of parliamentary seats in Ecuador. 3.7%.
They were essentially locked out of the legislative process.
It was an all-boys club writing the laws for the entire nation. Fast forward to 2023. Women now hold 43.1% of the seats.
The contrast with the global baseline is stark here.
Yeah, how does the rest of the world look?
The global average for female parliamentary representation in 2023 only grew from 11.5% in 1990 to 26.5% today.
Well, Ecuador went from 3.7 to 43.1.
Yes, Ecuador's growth is nearly an 11-fold increase. They are moving toward political parity at a speed roughly 5 times faster than the rest of the world.
And as a quick reminder to you listening, when we look at this political data, we are strictly analyzing the statistical representation of women in the legislative body.
Right, just the demographics.
We aren't endorsing any specific political parties or debating left-wing versus right-wing ideologies or discussing specific politicians in Ecuador. The data simply measures who is sitting in the room where the laws are made.
Exactly.
And in Ecuador, that room has transformed from 96% male to an almost perfectly split gender dynamic in just one generation.
It is a profound institutional shift, and it explains the causality behind everything we've discussed. It is a massive feedback loop.
How does a loop work?
When 43% of your lawmakers are women, the legislative priorities naturally shift. Policies regarding maternal health care, which we just saw reflected in the 65.7 MMR, receive more institutional oxygen.
Workplace protections and equitable educational access get funded.
Yes. The two engines, health and political power, feed each other. Healthier women participate in politics, and female politicians fund better health.
Okay, so between men and women, the scales are incredibly, almost miraculously balanced. But what happens when we zoom out?
Beyond just gender.
Yeah, what happens when we stop looking just at the divide between genders and look at the gap between the rich and the poor? Because, as we established way back at the beginning, they are operating with a smaller $13,986 economic wallet overall.
Right.
If the pie is smaller, who is getting the biggest slices?
This brings us to a crucial, sobering adjustment in the data, the Inequality-Adjusted Human Development Index, or the IHDI.
Let's unpack the IHDI.
Yeah.
Because a regular average can be deeply misleading.
Think of the IHDI as a discount rate applied to a country's development. We know Ecuador has an impressive HDI of 0.777.
But that is an average across the entire population.
Exactly. Averages can hide massive, painful disparities. If one person has a 10-course feast and 9 people are starving, the mathematical average still looks like everyone had a decent meal.
That's a great way to put it.
The IHDI penalizes a country for how unevenly its health, education, and income are actually distributed among the population. When you factor in internal inequality, the development achievements shrink.
So we take Ecuador's shiny 0.777 HDI, We apply this inequality discount, and it shrinks down to an IHDI of 0.640.
Right.
That is a total loss of 17.6% of their human development simply due to internal inequality. It sounds bad. It sounds like a massive penalty.
But context is everything in data analysis. We must compare it to the global baseline.
Okay, what happens globally?
The global average HDI is 1756. When we apply the inequality discount to the global average, it plummets to 0.590. That is a devastating loss of 22.0%.
Oh, so the global average shrinks by 22% because of inequality, but Ecuador only shrinks by 17.6%.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? The conclusion here is that Ecuador's distribution of its development, even with its flaws, even with the smaller wallet, is actually fairer and more equitable than the global average.
Correct. But we cannot stop at the macro level. We
Yeah.
have to look at the 3D breakdown of that inequality to find out exactly where the pain points are.
A 3D breakdown.
Inequality isn't a monolith. It lives in 3 distinct pillars: education, life expectancy, and income.
Let's look at education inequality first. In Ecuador, the inequality in education distribution is 12.1%.
And the global average is a massive 21.5%.
Wow, so Ecuador wins that one easily. Their educational resources, while perhaps facing dropout issues, as we discussed, are distributed very evenly across the population.
Now look at life expectancy inequality. In Ecuador, it's 8.4%. The global average is 12.9%.
Again, Ecuador wins.
Yeah.
The extra 4 years of life they've secured are relatively evenly spread across different demographic groups, not just hoarded by the wealthy.
But then we hit the third pillar, income inequality.
Let's hear it.
In Ecuador, income inequality sits at 30.6%. The global average is 30.4%.
There it is, the plot twist in the data.
Exactly. Despite all the incredible social wins, the near-perfect gender parity, the evenly distributed education, the extended lifespans income distribution is Ecuador's Achilles heel.
It is the one single area where they're actually slightly worse than the global average.
The financial wealth that does exist in the country is heavily concentrated at the top.
It paints a fascinating, complex picture of a society. They have used government policy and institutional focus to brilliantly engineer social equality.
Yes, they distribute the schools, the hospitals, and the voting rights incredibly fairly.
But they have failed to democratize the actual financial wealth of the nation. It's a striking juxtaposition.
And it leads us perfectly into the final macro dimension of this report, because there is one more discount we have to apply to human development.
What's left?
We have measured how fair the development is to the people. Now we must measure how fair it is to the planet.
Yes. The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI, or the PHDI. This is such a crucial metric for the 21st century.
Yeah, it really is.
It basically asks a simple question. If we penalize countries for destroying the Earth to achieve their high living standards, how do the rankings change? Because we all know that traditionally the countries with the highest HDIs, the ones with the biggest wallets, are also the biggest polluters.
They built their wealth by burning carbon and extracting resources at unsustainable rates.
Exactly. So what happens to Ecuador?
When we apply the planetary pressure discount to Ecuador, their PHDI becomes 0.735. This is only a 5.4% penalty from their original HDI score.
Let's compare that to the rest of the world. The global average HDI drops by a massive 10.1% when you adjust for planetary pressures, falling all the way down to 0.680.
Ecuador is achieving its high human development with roughly half the environmental penalty of the global average.
To really understand the mechanics of this, we need to look at the per capita environmental footprint. I want you to picture this in your mind. Translate the data into physical reality.
The smokestacks and the footprints.
Right. Imagine a massive, billowing factory smokestack, and next to it, a giant, heavy footprint pressed deep into the dirt. The smokestack represents carbon dioxide emissions. The footprint represents the material footprint.
This is the actual physical weight of the concrete poured for roads, the lithium and rare earth metals mined for smartphones, and the fossil fuels burned to heat homes, all divided per person.
Globally, the average person produces 4.54 tons of CO2 emissions every single year. In Ecuador, the per capita CO2 emission is only 2.37 tons.
Almost exactly half the carbon output.
And look at the material footprint. The global average is a heavy 12.71 tons of physical material extracted from the earth per person per year. Ecuador's material footprint is just 6.93 tons.
Again, roughly half the extraction rate.
What this proves, fundamentally, is that the high-carbon, high-extraction Western model is not the only pathway to achieving a highly developed, gender-equal society.
Ecuador is providing an alternate blueprint: lower overall income, but incredibly high social parity, paired with a low carbon footprint.
It sounds almost utopian when you stack those macro numbers up like that. Equality, longevity, and environmental sustainability.
It does.
But we have to look at the ground level. We cannot ignore the Achilles heel of income inequality we uncovered earlier. We have to look at the most vulnerable people in this system.
And that brings us to the final data set in our stack, the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or the MPI.
The MPI is vital because it moves beyond just looking at a bank account.
It measures acute, overlapping deprivations in health, education, and living standards at the micro level, household by household.
And how does Ecuador fare?
On a macro level, Ecuador's MPI value is incredibly low, just 0.008, with a poverty incidence rate of only 2.1% of the population.
So extremely low overall poverty.
Yes, but within that 2.1%, the data reveals a stubborn, incredibly persistent pain point.
What is it?
When you break down what is actually causing the poverty for those specific families, you look at the contribution of different deprivations. Years of schooling accounts for 15.4% of the poverty profile.
Okay, but the biggest factor, nutrition. Nutrition accounts for a staggering 30.5% of the multidimensional poverty profile in Ecuador.
This is the micro-reality violently clashing with the macro data.
You can engineer an amazing overall human development index. You can balance your parliament perfectly between men and women. You can lower your carbon emissions.
But if you have high income inequality,
which we proved they do.
The absolute poorest households simply cannot afford high-quality, continuous caloric and nutritional intake.
It is the invisible anchor holding back that final 2% of the population. And it's the most insidious form of poverty because childhood nutrition dictates everything else.
It dictates cognitive development,
Which dictates future earning potential, which dictates immune system strength. It traps them.
It perfectly encapsulates the dual nature of our findings today. Phenomenal systemic architecture, hampered by concentrated wealth, and the lingering shadows of absolute economic deprivation at the very margins of society.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We have torn apart 33 years of data. Let's try to summarize the Ecuador paradox we've been unpacking.
If we were to place this entire report on a visual scale, a massive set of balance scales, it would look completely different than a traditional Western development model.
On one side of the scale, you have the traditional metrics of economic dominance, and this is where Ecuador struggles. Their national wallet is light.
Their overall gross national income lags 31% behind the world.
And the wealth they do have is highly concentrated, leading to income inequality that slightly exceeds the global average.
This lack of broad financial padding creates a highly vulnerable health infrastructure,
which we saw absolutely buckle and crash during the 2020 pandemic, costing them 5.3 years of life expectancy in a blink.
And at the very bottom of the economic ladder, nutritional poverty remains a deeply entrenched, stubborn foe.
But look at what is balancing the other side of the scale. Look at what they have built with the resources they have.
Despite the smaller economy, they have engineered an incredible longevity bonus,
granting their citizens an average of 4 extra years of life compared to the global baseline.
They have decoupled high human development from environmental destruction,
running a society with roughly half the carbon and material footprint of the global average.
And the absolute crown jewel, they lead the world in gender equality, a near-perfect 0.99 on the GDI.
Maternal mortality slashed to a fraction of the global average, saving families from economic collapse.
And a political system that evolved from an all-boys club of 3.7% female representation to a near-equal 43.1% in a single generation.
They proved that institutional focus and intentional policy can bend the curve of human development, even if your economy isn't globally dominant.
Which brings us to a final thought I want to leave with you, the listener.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much time looking at GDP. We treat it as the ultimate scoreboard for human success, the only metric that truly matters. But this deep dive into the data forces us to ask a difficult question about our own societies.
Yeah, it really has.
If a country can engineer an extra 4 years of human life, if they can achieve near-perfect gender parity in their laws and their health outcomes, and if they can do all of this while treading lightly on the earth, all without having a massive world-leading GDP, is the developed world's obsession with economic growth at all costs actually the best way to improve human life?
Or is it just the most profitable?
Yeah.
That is a question that completely reframes how we look at progress and how we measure the worth of a society. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today. Keep questioning the numbers around you, keep looking for the hidden stories in the data, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.